Okay, so welcome to our seminar. We're very, very happy to have Shubhangi here. I guess Shubhangi usually needs no introduction, so I'll give a very short one. So she did her PhD at MIT with Madhu. And after that, she was a faculty of Rutgers. And then now she's at UOT, much closer to us, much nicer. And yeah, she's going to talk to us today about improved set-multilinear bounds, lower bounds, and this joint work with Deepanshu. So
thank you, Rafael, for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. It's a short train ride away, and I hope I keep coming here to hang out with everyone. Okay, so I will tell you all about set-multilinear circuit lower bounds. Good. So good. The plan is to talk about lower bounds for set-multilinear circuits. So let me tell you, the first thing I will tell you is why am I studying set-multilinear circuits? And this has been motivated by, so this work was motivated by a sequence of really amazing arithmetic circuit lower bounds that were proved or discovered just in the last couple of years by Limaye, Srinivasan, and Tavenas. So in this talk, I'll give some background and context for these results, and in particular for set-multilinear lower bounds. And I will describe our new results, and I will say a few words about the proof. Okay, so let me just set up the definition. So an arithmetic circuit looks like an object of the following kind. There is some underlying field. It could be a finite field, it could be the real numbers, some underlying field. And this is a circuit which computes a polynomial. So there are n underlying variables, and you add and multiply them in some order. So the gates are not like the Boolean and or nots, but the gates are addition and multiplication gates. And you can take as the input variables and constants from the field and add and multiply them in some order. And at the output, you compute a polynomial. And every intermediate gate of the circuit is also computing a polynomial. Interesting parameters for this circuit setting is the depth of the circuit is the length of the longest path from the root to a leaf. The size of the circuit is the number of gates in the circuit. The degree of a circuit, I will refer to the maximum degree of any monomial computed at any gate in the circuit. There's a related notion of arithmetic formulas. Just like in the Boolean world, you have Boolean circuits, Boolean formulas. Even in the arithmetic world, if this underlying graph of the circuit looks like a tree, then you call it you get an arithmetic formula. And in particular, the output of any gate cannot be reused. So there's only each and an easy to verify fact is that if you have a size S circuit of depth delta, then you can think of delta being small. Then you can convert it to an equivalent formula just by repeating the gates enough times. You can convert it to an equivalent formula with some blow up in size. And so if the depth or the number of product layers is at most delta, by a blow up of size S circuit, it will go to a size S to the delta formula, computing the same polynomial. So when delta is like constant, and you don't care about polynomial factors, then circuits and formulas are basically the same. But for larger depths, it makes a difference. Variant, a long time ago, proposed the VP versus VNP question, which is an algebraic analog of the P versus NP question. And so he defined the classes VP and VNP, where VP is trying to be an algebraic analog of P. It's those polynomials that can be computed efficiently. So there are polynomial sized circuits computing the polynomials of polynomial degree. And VNP is trying to mimic NP or hard polynomials. This is the class of polynomials that can be computed explicitly. I'm not going to define VNP formally, but the permanent polynomial is known to be complete. So if you can find an explicit polynomial for which you can prove that there's no which cannot explicitly be computed by a polynomial size arithmetic circuit, then you would have proved VP not equal to VNP. And is there someone here who doesn't know the permanent polynomial? So everybody's aware of it. So the permanent is an example of a polynomial which is an explicit polynomial, and it's a big open question to show that it cannot be efficiently computed. Okay, so maybe the main open question in algebraic complexity theory is to separate VP from VNP. And that's the same as proving a superpolynomial circuit lower bound for an explicit polynomial. This is a big grand challenge, and we are nowhere close to being able to resolve this. Another very interesting question, and major open question, is to do the same for formulas. Find an explicit polynomial which needs superpolynomial arithmetic formulas. So if you can do the first, of course, you can do the second, but possibly the second is an easier question to first prove lower bounds for arithmetic formulas. And it's known that separating VP from VNP is in some sense a prerequisite to proving P not equal to. If you want to attack the P not equal to NP question, this is a very reasonable place to start first. Because in the algebraic world, there's a lot more structure, and so lower bounds are potentially much easier to prove in this setting than for general Boolean computation. So let me tell you what this, so these are the big questions. Let me tell you what progress has been made over the last few decades towards this goal. So just to be able to compare results, let's imagine that we're talking about degree n polynomials in about n variables. And in this setting, for general circuits, the best lower bounds we know are of the mildly superlinear lower bounds. And this was in the 80s, and there's been no progress since then. If you have arithmetic formulas, we can do slightly better because we know quadratic lower bounds. Okay, so clearly this progress was very hard. It's stalled because we don't know how to approach general circuits. So there was a lot of attention focused on restricted models of computation, and bounded depth arithmetic circuits was one such restriction which proved to be hard and at the same time interesting. What do you know about bounded depth circuits? Depth 2 circuits. To prove lower bounds for depth 2 circuits, that is trivial in the sense. So a depth 2 circuit is a sum of products. So a depth 2 circuit computes a polynomial in its monomial representation, because the product gates can only compute monomials, and a sum of products is writing a polynomial as a sum of monomials. So any polynomial which has a lot of monomials, like the determinant or the permanent, you can get such depth 2 circuits computing such polynomials have to have size n to the n. So lower bounds for depth 2 circuits is trivial. The moment you even go to depth 3 circuits, so depth 3 circuits products of sums. The moment you even go to depth 3 circuits, general depth 3 circuits, our understanding suddenly it got much, much harder. So till recently, for general depth 3 circuits, the best lower bound we knew was just n cube. So maybe the determinant needs size n cube to compute using a depth 3 circuit. This was still recently, but things have changed since then. So I'll talk about that. So the best lower bounds we knew were n cube. And now when you impose further restrictions, like you look at homogeneous depth 3 circuits, a homogeneous depth 3 circuit is a depth 3 circuit where you're computing a homogeneous polynomial as output, but you're further requiring that every gate within the circuit compute a homogeneous polynomial. And so in particular, to compute a polynomial of degree n, at intermediate stages, you're not going to degree much larger than n to compute a polynomial of degree n. So if you further add this constraint of homogeneity, we knew exponential lower bounds for depth 3 circuits, and we've known it for a long time. We know pretty good lower bounds even for homogeneous depth 4 circuits. So without homogeneity, we don't know this, but for homogeneous depth 4 circuits, we know lower bounds of the form n to the square root n, which is pretty strong, and we will see in a few minutes why this n to the square root n is interesting. If you look at depth 3 circuits over small finite fields, we know exponential lower bounds. for unrestricted depth D circuits. So for depth 3, I said we knew n cube, and in general for depth D circuits, the best lower bounds we knew were of the form n to the 1 plus 1 over. So slightly superlinear, not even quadratic. So any for larger D, just slightly superlinear was the best we knew. And once you also restrict the circuit to be a multilinear circuit, so with further restrictions like multilinearity, we knew exponential lower bounds again. And so people have studied, other models have been studied like multilinear formulas, monotone circuits, and in various settings, various lower bounds are known. But the point I wanted to bring across is that without additional restrictions, even for bounded depth circuits, very, very weak lower bounds are known. So even depth 3 was not understood, and depth 4 onwards, there were almost no lower bounds known. And so clearly even bounded depth circuits seem really very interesting and hard to understand. And people kind of understood also in the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of understanding of why bounded depth circuits are so interesting. So in Tavenas, building upon work of Koiran, building upon Agarwal Vinay, which built upon the classical work of Valiant et al., it has been shown in all these sequence of works that if you take a general, you can squash it down to a bounded depth circuit without too much of a blow up in size. Such a result is not known in the Boolean world, but in the arithmetic world, you can take a general circuit. And so one of the results is you can start with the polynomial size general circuit and squash it down to a depth 4 circuit where the blow up in size is of the form 2 to the root n log n. It's an exponential blow up, but it's not a maximal blow up. You could have expected that at any depth 4 circuit, when you squash it down, the size becomes n to the n. That's what for a typical, for random polynomial, that's the size of a depth 4 circuit you need to compute it. But these depth reduction results are doing something non-trivial. You start with a, I don't know what sub-exponential size depth 4 circuit computing is 2 to the root n, not the form 2 to the n. But like, okay, fine, who cares? As it is, it's so hard to prove lower bounds for depth 4 circuits anyway. But it turns out that these depth reduction results were very intriguing because, okay, you start with a polynomial. It turned out your circuit computing the polynomial was a homogeneous circuit, which was of general depth. And it turns out in general depth, you can assume homogeneity for free. Like you don't need to, you can always compute a homogeneous polynomial using a homogeneous circuit without much loss. You can take this homogeneous polynomial size circuit, squash it into a depth 4 circuit of size 2 to the root n log n. Polynomial lower bounds for general circuits. It suffices to prove super 2 to the root n log n lower bounds for homogeneous depth 4 circuits. And then there was a lot of renewed interest again in the last decade or a bit more on proving lower bounds for depth 4 homogeneous depth 4 circuits. And it turns out we do know exponential lower bounds for homogeneous depth 4 circuits, but this exponential is just at this threshold, this 2 to the root n log n. So we know lower bounds of the form 2 to the big omega root n log n for homogeneous depth 4 circuits. So that big omega can become little omega, then that will imply super polynomial lower bounds for general circuits and Vp is not equal to VNP, resolving this big grand challenge of algebraic complexity field. So this depth reduction, so it turns out that in some sense, it seems that we're really, really close. We know surprisingly strong lower bounds for homogeneous depth 4 circuits. And they're surprisingly strong in the sense that if we can make it just a teeny tiny bit stronger, VP is not equal to VNP. So it's a lot of exciting developments. And who knows whether we're really close to resolving VP not equal to VNP or not. But despite so much progress, and despite being so close to resolving the VP versus VNP question, still the best lower bounds for even depth 3 circuits were just cubic. You're trying to resolve it for all circuits and just try to improve the status for depth 3 circuits. And this was still elusive. And I know lots of people worked really hard on this question. Right. The big breakthrough came in 2021. This paper received the Fox Best Paper Award. They gave the first super polynomial lower bounds for depth 3 circuits. And in fact, for any constant depth circuits. It was a really cool, really elegant paper, which in one shot, I mean, just for all constant depth circuits, it gave super polynomial lower bounds. It's still not good enough to resolve the VP versus VNP question, but it's just way progress much far beyond what was possible prior to this work, or what we knew prior to this work. So because in the Boolean world, we have known lower bounds for constant depth Boolean circuits all along, and very strong in optional and things like that. But in the algebraic world, it was elusive, and this paper has made very interesting progress. And in the algebraic world, also we know by these depth reduction results that if you can get strong enough lower bounds for constant depth circuits, that tells you strong lower bounds for general circuits. So constant depth circuits are very, very interesting, and we now have, at least we have super polynomial lower bounds. Good. So that was the LST result.
How would you call them?
It's just mildly super polynomial. So maybe n to the not exactly. So yeah, so mildly super polynomial.
Much better than n cubed.
Much better than n cubed. So super polynomial, exactly. Super polynomial. So much better than n cubed. And for all depths, right? For depth 4, we knew n to the 1 plus epsilon. Basically, for any constant depth, we knew n to the 1 plus epsilon, where the epsilon was some small constant depending on d. And now it's super polynomial, like degree n variate, and you know super polynomial. Okay. So in this LST work, a very key ingredient or central role was in the proof was played by set multilinear circuits. In order to prove the super polynomial lower bounds for general constant depth circuits, they did this via proving super polynomial lower bounds for set multilinear constant depth circuits. So this notion of set multilinear circuits played a major role. So let me define what these set multilinear circuits are, because that's going to be the theme of the results I will talk about in this talk as well. So what's a set multilinear polynomial? Let me define it. So multilinear polynomial is a polynomial in which each variable appears with degree at most 1 in any monomial. A set multilinear polynomial is a further restriction. So there's variable x, and suppose x can be partitioned into d sets, x1 to xd, whose disjoint union gives x. So I say a polynomial is set multilinear with respect to this partition if every monomial picks up exactly one variable from each of these sets. So the determinant is a set multilinear polynomial, because you look at the matrix, n by n matrix, and you look at the sets being the columns, then the determinant is set multilinear with respect to that partition. It's even if you partition around the rows, the determinant is a set multilinear polynomial. So many nice polynomials. The permanent is a set multilinear polynomial. Here's another example of a polynomial that's set multilinear. It's the iteration polynomial. So you look at D matrices. Each matrix is an n by n matrix. But each entry, so the x1 matrix has n squared entries. These are all distinct variables. X2 is an n by n matrix, full of each entry is a variable, but fresh n square variables. So the total number of variables is d times n square. And you look at the product of the matrix product of these D matrices, and look at the 1, 1 entry of the output. That is a polynomial in all of these variables. And it's a set multilinear polynomial in the variables. And the sets are x1, x2, and through xd, because each monomial in that product picks up one variable from each matrix. So this iterated matrix multiplication polynomial will be very, very important. So the 1, 1 entry in the product is called the IMM polynomial. IMM sub n comma d. N is the dimension of the matrix, and d is the number of matrices. So the determinants permanent are also set multilinear. I'll say a circuit or a formula computing a set multilinear polynomial is itself set multilinear if every gate of the circuit is computing a set multilinear polynomial, respecting this partition. So when you know that the output has every monomial being set multilinear, I want that along the computation, along the way also, the gates are only computing set multilinear things. You're not computing monomials which are not set multilinear, which then cancel out and then the output is finally set multilinear. So you're requiring every gate, every internal node to compute a set multilinear polynomial. Then the formula or circuit is called set multilinear. Good. So that's what a set multilinear circuit is and a set multilinear polynomial. Constant depth, I've been talking about constant depth circuits. So this is an example of a constant depth circuit. The depth is 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So the output gate is typically an addition gate, and then you layer the circuit. So there's additions followed by multiplications and additions and multiplications, and then you take the input variable. And here the depth is 4, but the product depth is 2, the multiplication layers. And so I'll focus on product depth, this term in this talk. But the depth and the product depth I just talked by a factor of 2, because, or a bit more than 2, because we're alternating the layers between additions and multiplications. So this is an example of a sum product circuit. Okay, so let me state the main result and then I'll come back to explain parameters in the result. So the results that I want to talk about is, say you have a constant depth circuit. So delta, the depth is constant. Think of delta to even be 2. It's already interesting for delta equal to 2. Then there is an explicit set multilinear polynomial of degree n and in n square variables. The permanent has this property, right? It's set multilinear, degree n in n square variables. The determinant is explicit, degree n, n square variables. But the polynomial I'll be talking about is not one of these. It is there is an explicit polynomial in n square variables of degree n, such that using a set multilinear constant depth circuit, then that circuit must have large size. That circuit or formula must have large size. How large? That's how large we get it. And something like n to the d to the 1 over delta. So if delta is 1, that's, and you said that any set multilinear polynomial computing it must have size at least n to the d. But for delta equal to 1, this has been known for a long time. At delta equal to 2, it's saying that any product depth 2 circuit computing this class of polynomials has size n to the root d. And delta equal to 3, it's n to the d to the 1. So that's the main result. And the significance of this result is really in the quantitative, this precise quantitative bound n to the d to the 1 over delta. The precise value of it is going to be important, and I'll explain why that bound of n to the d to the 1 over delta is nice. We also have, using our same techniques, we can also show that if you have formulas of unbounded depth computing the same polynomial, it must have size at least n to the log n. But the second result was in some sense known already in the past. So let me tell you why the result is interesting, or why the precise quantitative bound of n to the d to the 1 over delta is interesting. So to tell you why it's interesting, let's go back to the LST, the proof of this new result I said, which showed the first superpolynomial by Iterated. Let's go back into that result and to their proof. So the way the LST proved their result was by following. They said, okay, let's start with any size s degree d formula which has product depth delta. And no, not set multi, starting with an arbitrary constant depth circuit, where let's think of the degree is d and the size is s. Then they showed that you can take this circuit or formula and massage it into another circuit or formula, which is now set multilinear, and it computes the same polynomial. So you play around with the circuit, you do some cutting, pasting, whatever. You turn it into a set multilinear circuit computing the same formula, but the size blows up. How much does it blow up? It blows up. So the product depth was delta, it became something like 2 times delta. The depth blew up a teeny bit. but the size blew up a lot. It blew up by S, so polynomial in S times D to the big O. So D is like N, then D to the order D is like N to the N, and so it's prohibitively big blow up. But what's interesting is that if D is small, if D is like root log, like log N or log, if D is log N over log N, then this blow up is actually a dynamic blow up. So the interesting setting of this process, set multilinearization, is when the degree is small. So think of the degree being log N or something between log N and log N over log N. In that regime, you just get a polynomial blow up in the size. You start with a regular circuit of constant depth, and you move to a set multilinear circuit of constant depth, computing the same polynomial. Which means in this regime, if you prove lower bounds for set multilinear constant depth formulas, implies lower bounds for regular constant depth formulas. And their main result was to prove lower bounds for this general constant depth formulas. They observed that, look, we just need to prove lower bounds for constant depth set multilinear formulas, as long as you can do it in the regime when the degree is small. As long as you can prove the super polynomial low bounds when degree is small, you're fine. Good. So that's how they did it. They proved then for this product depth delta set multilinear formulas, when the degree is small, they were able to prove super polynomial low bounds. Okay, like N to the set B to be something like square root log N or log N over log N, and observe that you get a super polynomial lower bound for constant depth set multilinear formulas. And that translates into a super polynomial lower bound for unbound for general constant depth formulas. Yes? Good. So set multilinear formulas clear. So the bulk of their proof is to do this step, to prove the lower bounds for set multilinear formulas. And it turns out this set multilinearization step, going from general formulas to set multilinear formulas by doing some transformation, is by Raz in a previous work, but not for the constant depth setting. This is for general formulas. Raz had already shown that you can take a general formula and convert it into a general set multilinear formula with a blow up. And when the degree is small, the blow up is not too much. And so this wasn't a depth preserving transformation, but by Raz's stick, maybe I have it on the next slide. Yeah, what Raz showed was something similar, but without the depth preservation. You start with an arbitrary formula of size S. You can transform it to a set multilinear formula of size poly S times log S to the big O of D. Again, that means if D is less than log N over log N, and this is all just a polynomial block. And so, yes, if you have a set multilinear polynomial of low degree, and if you can prove super polynomial lower bounds for that, then you can translate into super polynomial lower bounds for general formulas. Okay, so having a super polynomial set multilinear formula lower bounds for a low degree polynomial implies super polynomial lower bounds for general formulas. Questions? And if this would resolve one of those big grand challenges I talked about. So just studying set multilinear formulas is hence very, very interesting. Good. So, but so far we just saw that studying set multilinear formulas was interesting for low degree settings. If you can do set multilinear, prove good set multilinear low bounds for low degrees, that's very, very interesting. It turns out that studying set multilinear lower bounds, even in the large degree setting, are interesting. And let me say why it's interesting, even for large degrees. So clearly from the Raz and LST works, yeah, low degrees essential. Let me, in low degree settings is essential. Let me tell you why it's interesting for large degrees. There was a follow-up work by LST, where they proved this first super polynomial lower bounds for general set multilinear formulas. And they did this for formulas computing the IMM polynomial. IMM n comma n. So large degree IMM. for this setting, they proved the first superpolynomial. And let me tell you why that is interesting. So let me tell you why the IMM polynomial in particular is so interesting. So if you look at IMM n comma d is the product of d n by n matrices. To compute the product of d n by n matrices, you can do this recursively using a divide and conquer approach. You look at it, you break up the n product of n matrices as maybe as a product of these n over 2 matrices times the product of those n over 2 matrices. Then the n over 2 matrices is the product of n over 4 times n over 4 times n over 4 times n over 4. Using some divide and conquer approach, you can compute the IMM using a formula of size n to the log d. So the d matrices, you do log d iterations of this, you get a formula of size n to the log d computing IMM. And if you want to do this in a constant depth setting, you can do something clever and you can get for any delta, you can get a product depth delta formula computing IMM. And the size of that formula will be something like n to the d to the 1 over delta. It's a little bit of same divide and conquer, but maybe you, for instance, if you had and you have d matrices, you make blocks of size root d, and you brute force compute the product of these root d matrices, and then these root d matrices, and then these root d matrices, and then you get the problem. Now you compute a product of root d matrices, and you compute it in a brute force way, and that gives you a formula of product depth 2, and the size of the formula is something like n to the root d. Okay, so if you want to compute the IMM using constant depth circuits, you can do it using divide and conquer. But note this parameter, n to the d to the 1 over delta. That's the same bound I got when I talked about the lower bounds for set multilinear circuits. We had the n to the d to the 1 over delta, the same constant. So IMM can be computed. N to the d to the 1 over delta. And this formula computing the IMM is set multilinear. And it turns out, even if you want to be non-set multilinear, we don't know how to compute IMM more efficiently. In fact, it's conjectured that this bound is tight for the IMM. If you want to compute IMM using product depth delta, you must have need size n to the d to the 1 over delta. Okay, fine. IMM has a very interesting property, which is IMM is self-reducible. So to construct IMM product of n matrices, you can do it recursively by using algorithms for computing IMM for the product of d matrices, where d is smaller than n. So if you compute the product into sub-problems, which is the IMM of fewer matrices at a time, it's easy to see that if you can compute the product of d matrices very fast, then you can use it to compute the product of n matrices very fast. Because to compute n matrices as a subroutine, you're using IMM of 4D matrices. So if you had a formula of size n to the little o log d for IMM of n comma d, this will imply a formula of size n to the little o log n for IMM n comma n. In particular, if you could prove optimal lower bounds for IMM n comma n, so n to the log n for unbounded depth or n to the d to the 1 over delta for depth delta, if you could prove optimal lower bounds for IMM n comma n, this would imply optimal lower bounds for IMM n comma d for any d less than n. And hence, if you can prove optimal lower bounds for IMM, even for large n, that gives you optimal lower bounds for IMM even for small degree, for d much smaller than n, d being like log n or log n over log n or whatever. And then you can plug it in into the LST results or the RAS results or whatever, and you can then prove lower bounds for general formulas using that. So if your lower bound is for the IMM polynomial, you can prove set multilinear lower bounds for the IMM polynomial. Then even if your degree is large, it's fine. Because if your lower bound is for large degree, it implies a lower bound for small degree. And then you can then use all the other technology to then get lower bounds for general formulas. So proving the optimal lower bound for IMM n will have dramatic consequences. So to prove general arithmetic formula lower bounds, it suffices to prove optimal set multilinear lower bounds for IMM n comma n. That's the summary. Yes.
And like lower bounds for the formula would be only of the low degree set regimes, right? So
You're saying like even if I do IMM lower bounds on the high degree regime, what I'm implying is plugging through all these words is that a lower bound for a low degree polynomial, right?
Yes, but a super polynomial.
A super polynomial, yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's low. At that point, it's super polynomial, no matter the degree, right? It's super polynomial in N. So it's still the good old super polynomial. But it will go through the low degree. You'll have to get the super polynomials.
Low degree, like much lower than like root n or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
So like,
You won't get N to the root N like lower
Right.
bounds, right? The lower bounds you will get will be N to the root D, where D is log N.
right.
So then best the low bounds will be of the form N to the
log n.
into the root log N or something like that. Exactly. But this will be formula low bound, general formula low bounds. So to prove general arithmetic formula, super polynomial general formula low bounds, it suffices to prove formula low bound. But that set, these low bounds have to be optimal and they have to be for IMM or any polynomial which has this reducibility property. Good. So can we do this? So LST was able to prove a lower bound of the form log n to the log n for the IMM for general formulas. The optimal lower bound for general formulas for the IMM, not general, so this is all in the set multilinear world. In the set multilinear world, let's see what's the best formula lower bounds we have. And LST could show log n to the log n for IMM. N to the log n is optimal. Log n to the log n into an n to the log n. Plugging into everything I talked about, this gives you super polynomial general formula lower bounds and is awesome. So what remains to be done is to turn that log n into the log n into an n to the log n. It turns out that forget unbounded depth, even for constant depth, we don't have optimal IMM low bounds. So LST were able to show even for delta equal to 2, we don't have the best IMM low bounds. We don't have n to the root n. LST was able to get a log n to the root n lower bound for IMM. And again, n to the root n is the best possible. Log n to the root n tells you nothing interesting. If it's not optimal, it really for these set multilinear lower bounds, it needs to be optimal to go from high degree to low degree. So LST got log n to the root n lower bounds. And the best previous lower bound was 2 to the root n by Nissan and Vigdison from 97. Yes.
So in a sense, so, yeah, it's really amazing. And in a sense, this is like separating kind of VNC2 to VNC1, right? It's kind of like, because you're using an easy polynomial, and then you're saying, okay, this is an NC2 that we know by the variant skew at all, versus like kind of general formulas, right?
Right.
But is it NC1, the general formula? They will be. We don't know in general, but because we know there's a blow up of like n to the log square, right? When you go from certain formula.
N to the log.
N to the log. But it's log s, log d for variance.
Log s log. Oh. 2 to the log s log d maybe.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I always get confused. Okay,
It's
so
2 to the
n
log s. So it's
log.
n
Okay,
to the
okay,
log.
okay. And this is just separating VNC1 and VNC2, right?
Mhm.
That's the.
Mhm.
Okay, okay.
Good. So we're looking at the optimal lower bounds for IMM. Okay, so we don't know the optimal lower bounds in the set multilinear world, even for depth 2. Not for depth, sorry, for product depth 2. The best we know is we knew 2 to the root n, LST made it log n to the root n. And for constant depth, constant product depth delta, LST got log n to the n to the 1 over delta. Again, n to the n to the 1 over delta is the best you could hope for. So the big goal is, can you improve the base of log n to n? And okay, fine. Can you even do it for some polynomial? Forget IMM. Can you get these optimal set multilinear low bounds for some polynomial? And it turned out we didn't know how to do it for any polynomial. And so in the work that I mentioned, that I'm talking about, we are able to do it for some polynomial. If you can do it for IMM, you've got formula low bounds. We don't know how to do it for IMM, but we showed that there is some polynomial for which we can get these optimal lower bounds. So that's the significance of why that optimal was important, that it's n to the d to the 1 over delta. If it's not this value, then you cannot use all this self-reduction, etc. So we get these optimal lower bounds for some polynomial. If you can turn that some polynomial into IMM, then you get formula lower bounds. And you can also do it for unbounded depth and get n to the log n lower bounds. But which is interesting, using the same techniques, we can get these lower bounds. But these same lower bounds were known by Raz for multilinear formulas computing the determinant in the past. So this is just a different technique to get these bounds with the no. Good. So relationship of our bounds to the depth reduction results that I had mentioned in the past. So we know that any set multilinear circuit of polynomial size can be squashed into a depth delta circuit, product of delta circuit of size n to the d to the 1 over delta. So and again, our bounds, we do get lower bounds in the form n to the d to the 1 over delta, which means if our bounds can be improved even a little bit, they'll imply set multilinear circuit lower bounds, which are not known. So our bounds are kind of sharp, like any improvement would again have very interesting other consequences. And Raphael has work, a paper with Mrinal and Ramprasad, showing that in a improved depth reduction in some settings. So in the set multilinear world, if you can get improved depth reduction, then using our results, you would get set multilinear circuit lower bounds. So for any improvement in the lower bounds or any improvement in the depth reduction in either direction, it would give you new circuit lower bounds. Okay, so let me tell you what is this polynomial. I said we can't do it for the IMM, but we can do it for some polynomial. Let me tell you what this some polynomial is. It is a very popular polynomial for proving lower bounds. It's the Nissan-Wigderson family of polynomials. Several complexity lower bounds in the past were first shown for this Nissan-Wigderson family, which is in VMP. And then after a lot of hard work, they were shown for the IMM. So I'm aware of two such works. So when people were proving lower bounds for homogeneous depth 4 circuits, there was a lower bound proved of the form n to the root n for homogeneous depth 4 circuits of bounded bottom Fanon. Kaya, Saha, Saptarishi. They first proved it for the Nissan-Wigderson polynomial, and then it was improved to the IMM in the follow-up work, where the hard polynomial became IMM. And then when people were trying to prove lower bounds for homogeneous depth 4 formulas without bottom Fanon, again, the first lower bounds was shown with the hard polynomial was this Nissan-Wigderson. And after considerable hard work in joint work with Mrinal, we made it work over the IMM. So in the past, there have been several instances of this. Easier to show lower bounds for the Nissan-Wigderson family, and you work really hard, and then you can do it for IMM. So if this strategy can be implemented for this result, like we have the lower bounds for the Nissan-Wigderson family, if you now work really hard and you can do it for IMM, then it will give you super polynomial formula lower bounds. So that was the hope of this work. Like when we could do it, when we did it for the Nissan-Wigderson family, we were really excited. We said, okay, now we just have to work really hard and now do it for the IMM. We haven't succeeded in doing it yet for the IMM. So our motivation was to eventually do it for the IMM, but so this is hopefully along the way to that. Okay, so I have a few minutes left. Let me say a few words about the proof, what goes into proving these lower bounds for the Nissan-Wigderson family. So I think techniques are a variation on the partial derivative technique method, which has been used in most of these lower bounds in the past. So let me tell you how a typical algebraic circuit lower bound looks like. You come up with some complexity measure, which to every polynomial you associate with it in a number. That's how measures how complex that polynomial is. You take this measure, the goal is to show that the complexity of the Nissan-Wigderson polynomial is very large, and the complexity of small circuits is very small. And so you need a large circuit hence to compute the Nissan-Wigderson polynomial. So we'll use the partial derivative measure. It was introduced by Nissan and Wigderson a long time ago and has been refined and further developed in subsequent lower bound works. So even LST use a variation of the partial derivative method. And our method we use is some hybrid between LST and some works of Raz in the past. So this is what the partial derivative measure is. So let me just quickly define it, and I won't go too much into detail. So we were looking at set multilinear circuits. So our set of variables was partitioned into sets, x1 to xd. So this is the measure we'll use. Each set, you uniformly at random, you call it a positive or negative. So each set gets the tag positive or negative with 50-50% chance. You look at all, let P be the set of all positive sets and N be the set of all negative sets. Let M to the P be all multilinear monomials over the positive set. M to the N is all the set multilinear monomials over the negative set. And you create this big matrix indexed by monomials over the negative set, and the columns are monomials over the positive set. And in the ijth entry of the matrix, you write the coefficient of the monomial, which is the product of the index of the row and column. So for every row name and column name, you look at the two small monomials which are in the column name, you look at the product. Whatever is the coefficient of that monomial, you put it into the matrix. And the measure of complexity for us is just the rank of this matrix. And just to contrast with other measures, LST used not this randomized measure, it was a deterministic measure, but it was used some asymmetry in the sizes of these sets. Nisan-Wigderson used random restrictions and then used some measure. Our measure is also a random measure, but no random restrictions, and looks a little more like Raz and Raziu, their works from the past, but still inspired by the LST work. So we show that under the measure I defined, the Nisan-Wigderson, this time it's easy to show that the Nisan-Wigderson is always full rank. It was a little harder work to show that the circuit has small rank. And so the Nisan-Wigderson, maybe it's not, I'm running out of time, so I won't. So my slides are ending here. So I thought on the board, I'll say a few words about why the circuit has small rank, but maybe it will drag on for too long. So just believe me that, yeah, it's easy to show that the Nisan-Wigderson polynomial is high rank. And you do some analysis of the circuit and the shape of the circuit to argue for this complexity measure that with high probability, the rank is small, because the rank is a randomized, random. Okay, so just let me wrap up with interesting directions for future work. Then the obvious and most interesting question is to do this, what I said, like work harder and make the hard polynomial the IMM polynomial, because this would imply superpolynomial formula lower bounds in general. So don't know how to do this, but along with Deepanshu, I think we made some progress, that we made the hard polynomial simpler. We haven't made it all the way to the IMM, but we've managed to make it a simpler hard polynomial. So yeah, can we do something simpler? I think we're on our way to doing that. Other interesting questions are, can you say that for set multilinear polynomials, can you have a depth hierarchy theorem, like depth 5 circuits? I show that if you the hard polynomial is a depth 5 circuit, and any depth 4 circuit computing it has to have large size. So we don't know good depth hierarchy theorems for it. And another interesting question is, can you do improved depth reduction in the set multilinear world? So you can do improved depth reduction of general circuits to set multilinear bounded depth circuits. Then using our results, maybe you can get lower bounds for set multilinear circuits. So I will end here. Thank you. Yes. P not equal to NP does not imply, I think other way. No, what do I say? P not equal, P not equal to NP implies VP not equal to VNP. P not equal to NP in a uniform sense. There are no polynomial size circuits for NP. In the non-uniform setting, if you can prove that there's no small circuits for SAT. Yeah, so if you can't compute it, so P not equal to, so for instance, for the VP not equal to VNP, so VP, to separate VP from VNP, you want to show that there's no polynomial size arithmetic circuits for the permanent polynomial. If there were polynomial size arithmetic circuits for the permanent, then you could get polynomial size Boolean circuits. The arithmetic circuit will create a Boolean circuit. And you get a polynomial size Boolean circuit for the permanent, but the permanent is harder than SAT. It's counting, it captures counting SAT and things like that. So at least in the non-uniform sense, P not equal to NP implies VP not equal to VNP.
And in the uniform sense.
I don't know. In the uniform setting, I don't maybe some things are known, but I don't know. Maybe Raphael, you know what's
Yeah.
nothing is.
The only thing that's known, and this is something to generalize your problem, like the thing that Shubhangi is saying. So under the GRH, if you prove over the complex numbers that VP is not equal to VNP, sorry, then the algorithm that you said that once you have a certain performance using complex numbers, you use the generalizer hypothesis to get a Boolean search.
Yeah, but maybe for over small fields, if you did it, maybe you don't need GRH.
Over small fields,
Yeah.
don't need exactly.
If you prove, so when you talk about VP versus VNP, maybe for that the question is, of every field, it's a different question. Like when you separate VP from VNP, you have to specify an underlying field. So what field are you showing the lower bounds for? Maybe play a role. But no matter what field you do it will still talk about, it's related to the P versus VNP.
There's one class of fields that we don't know, which are infinite fields of positive characters. Finite fields or, yeah. But yeah.
Also, like if we have low bound of IMM and N,
Hmm?
like does it imply any low bound of this multiplication just for like
More questions? Okay, then let's thank Shubhangi again and
Just to go back to here, we're not caring about polynomial overhead, the constant in the exponent. I was not caring so much about that. It was n to the omega, like the about polynomial overhead. It is yes. Either of you, yeah.
So how much do we have to improve the exponent, like into the into the 1 by delta, right?
N to the d to the 1 over delta.
Yeah, to the 1 over delta plus 1. So,
Or to prove circuit, you mean to show set-multilinear circuit low bound? Any 1 over delta plus 1 will just do it. Anything, any asymptotic
so
increase.
that's the thing. Get that improvement. We could do
Then you get any improvement in depth. Any so as long either the lower bounds improve, anything super constant in the exponent. So d to the 1 over delta going to d to the 1 over delta plus 1 is super constant increase. Yes.
Why do you need IM or can you work with any circuit?
Any self-reducible polynomial, but I don't know other interesting examples. But any polynomial which has this property that if you can do some high degree thing implies something for low degree, if you can do that, it will work for that. That's the only thing about IMM that is useful.